Hi everybody, and welcome to the fantastic launch that we have tonight of the emergency programme for jobs, services and for safety and for no scapegoating. It's been launched by People Before Profit. This is our launch meeting to see all the elements of the programme that we have today, and it's also to launch the website and to look at some potential days of action for us in order to try and make those aims that we have in the programme to turn them into reality. My name is Karen Reissmann. I'm a health worker. I'm from Manchester, and I've been part of the original health activists, worker COVID activist group, People Before Profit. And we set up right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when we began to realise that the things that we might have had, the PPE, the testing, the things that would have kept health workers safe, just weren't there for us. And we began to organise meetings like this with some of the people who are on the call tonight, who've been supporting and solid and developing sort of with us right from the beginning. And we organised days of action at that point when it was very difficult, when we were in lockdown, but we knew that if we didn't begin to organise some opposition to what was happening, that more and more people were going to die. And we managed to force them some retreats in getting some of the things that we needed, although sadly we still have one of the worst death rates amongst health workers in the world. And we also have one of the worst death rates of ordinary people who've died. Had they just put in lockdown a week earlier, then half the people who died wouldn't have had to. And that fight right from the beginning, right, we've seen very little opposition from the people who should be opposing what the Tories are doing. And that's why we set it up. And quite quickly, there've been some fantastic examples of people resisting. You look at what happened in terms of people resisting the widening opening of schools in June and July, led by the NEU and a number of serious activists, teachers, parents and school staff, and some of the other people speaking tonight who've been resisting. But the official opposition, the Labour Party and the trade unions, sadly, I don't think they have always been there. And I think that was summed up when Francis O'Grady stood next to Rishi Sunak last Thursday as he announced that he was demolishing the furlough scheme, which is inevitably going to lead to opening up to mass redundancies on a scale that we haven't yet seen, even though we've had a lot so far. And throughout that whole process, they've not been concerned about our safety. They've not been concerned about our lives. They've not been concerned about our living standards. And throughout it, they are happy to blame anybody but themselves for what's gone wrong. This Tory government has ideologically insisted on sticking to the market, to commercialisation. And I think it's the ideology that we know has failed them and completely incompetent. And I think when Francis O'Grady stood next to him, I think we have to say that we are not prepared to let that fight be left in the hands of people who aren't prepared to fight it. We want to coordinate all the people, whether it's people who are opposed to the scapegoating of health workers, the scapegoating of elderly, the scapegoating of people with disabilities, the scapegoating of Black people, the scapegoating of young people, the scapegoating of old people, the scapegoating of students now who are the top of the list to blame. And I think we have to say we're going to stand together and fight. We're going to fight for jobs. We're going to fight for the services that we work in. We're going to fight for safety, and we're going to oppose the scapegoating. We've got a couple of apologies from the list that we had. The first one is from Grace Blakely, who unfortunately has had to record tonight, and it's overrun, so she's not going to be able to make it. And Nadia Whittam the MP is also unable to come. But I'm going to start us off with a fantastic speaker who everybody will know, John McDonnell, who's the MP for Hayes and Harlington, who's been an absolute supporter of workers fighting back for years and years and years, including during this pandemic. And we have great pleasure in introducing John to start off our rally tonight.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks for organising the series of meetings that we've had, which I found have helped us coordinate some of the actions, as you say, that have taken place, and make sure that we can deliver real solidarity. Tonight we're talking about the launch of an emergency programme. Why? Because we're in an emergency. People have seen the news tonight, 7,000 new cases of COVID over the last 24 hours, deaths rising, hospital admissions rising. The second wave is now hitting us. So it's a combination of the pandemic, the health threat, but also Yes, the threat to jobs. The withdrawal of the furlough scheme by Sunak was brutal. And it said to me, you know, this is almost like going back to Thatcher, where the Tories in the 1980s said, actually, unemployment doesn't count. It doesn't matter. And that's exactly what's happening at the moment. We're on the edge of a major recession and a massive increase in unemployment. So we need an emergency program to protect people. And yes, as Karen has said, to start resisting what they're imposing upon us by way of job cuts. And in many instances where people are maintaining some form of employment, employers cutting wages and undermining conditions. And yes, putting people's safety at risk. So the emergency program is key. And people will be talking about different elements tonight, but let's be clear what this is about. This is about, first of all, protection of jobs. We're demanding the furlough scheme is extended to at least for 12 months, proper protection of jobs and wages. And we're talking about real living wages as well. And you know, these companies that have taken resources from the government, there should be conditions attached to those companies, no dividend payments. In addition to that, if necessary, taking a public stake in a number of these companies that are receiving resources from effectively us, the taxpayers. And we're saying to workers, those ones who are going to fight for their jobs, if you strike, if there are demonstrations, if there are occupations, we will support you. And we're seeing people, as Karen has said, people resisting and in many instances winning, pushing back the threats that they've had to their jobs and their living standards. But we're also seeing people forced back into work in unsafe conditions. So we're arguing that safety has got to be paramount. And the only people we can trust to guarantee safety are our union representatives, the unions themselves. So workplaces should be verified by unions as safe. And if not, workers shouldn't be forced into those places where they, as we've seen with the company called Boohoo, a report exposed the cramped conditions which literally put lives at risk. And where workers refuse to work in unsafe conditions, again, our job in solidarity is to support them. There's a discussion going on now about the economics of this crisis. Well, let's be absolutely clear. At the moment, every government is borrowing because, well, it's cheap to borrow. This is exactly the right thing to do in this sort of economic circumstances. Interest rates are so low, soon we could be into negative interest rates where banks are paying people to put their deposits in. There's been no shortage of individuals and people and institutions wanting to take government bonds. So of course we've got to borrow. But at some stage, we need to be absolutely clear. Yes, we are in favour of tax increases, not on ordinary people, but on the wealthy, the top 5%. Why can't they pay a bit more to enable us to get through this pandemic, but also so that we have a fairer society? And you know, also what we're saying is those people who are profiteering from this, we should make sure we crack down on them. People like Amazon and others who don't pay their taxes, exploit their workers, but also landlords who are expecting rents to be paid and threatening evictions still. We want a ban on the evictions. Finally, let me just say this. We know we can come through this pandemic if we work together, if we ensure in solidarity we protect jobs and each other and the safety of each other. But the big threat is coming, isn't it? And the big threat is climate change catastrophe. We've got to be now preparing to tackle the climate change catastrophe that threatens us. And that means actually investing in a green economy, making sure we're investing in housing, insulation of public buildings and housing, but also the development of alternative energy sources. In that way, you know, we can provide the jobs that can help us get through this pandemic and maintain wages and decent conditions of employment, but at the same time, we can tackle the existential threat of climate change. That's what this emergency program is about, because we're facing an immediate emergency, but also not just about the pandemic, but the emergency of climate change as well. So we will work, and we can do this by working in solidarity. So these days of action are going to demonstrate solidarity. That's exactly what we're about. Solidarity. And again, thanks to the organizers of the series of meetings and the development of this emergency program, which I think is going to be key in our campaigning as a labour and trade union movement over this coming period. Solidarity.
That's great, John. Thanks very much. A brilliant introduction. You're absolutely right. All those issues linked together. And the key is about solidarity. We have a new website, People Before Profit. It has the programme on that you can sign, and it has details of solidarity, who's taking action, who's in dispute, what's happening, so that you can look at how to offer that solidarity. And that's one of the things that we hope to do through this, this launch today. Our next speaker is part of the jobs section, extending the furlough section and defending jobs. And it's somebody who, again, has been part of our movement for a long time, a fantastic fighter for his members' rights, but also for offering solidarity to all the rest of it. It's Ian Hodson, who's the president of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union.
Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you and congratulations on the launch event that you're having tonight. And obviously I'd endorse everything that John McDonnell has said tonight. You know, everyone has the right to live and work in an environment where they can follow the public health directive necessary to reduce the risk of COVID. We have a right as a people to be able to care for ourselves, our families, our loved ones, and those who share our communities. It's imperative and in all our interests that the basic needs for all are met, and that includes all undocumented workers and people called for by the Status Now campaign. It's also why, as a union, we are working with DL Organised to replace the paltry SSP. We've seen the consequences of people being faced with a decision on being able to isolate or forced to go into work due to the inability to afford to live on £95.85 a week, which is £13.70 a day. Nobody should be faced with that choice. But it's something that impacts more than 2 million workers in this country. I'd urge everybody to join the campaign, and let's level up by making those bad employers contribute instead of having an advantage over those that try to do the right thing. You know, research has shown that employers that invest in their workers tend to be more heavily motivated to invest in their retention. And the same can be said about countries too. Compare the UK government's approach with other countries, say Germany or even Malta. It is said that those that often categorise their workforce as low skilled are often the same ones who are comfortable with an unstable markets, the low level workplace, the easy hire, easy fire culture that drives us down to the low road. Something Rishi Sunak seems content with, suggesting he won't protect all jobs. And by that statement, signalling to employers that he won't stand in their way if they want to take advantage of this crisis. This, for some employers, is going to be a golden opportunity to make cuts to jobs, conditions and pay. In fact, recent CBI surveys suggest companies are already to implement pay freezes. But if we are serious about not going back to normal, as a people, as a movement, we must come together to resist the job cuts. So don't moan about pay increase culture. We have to resist the fire rehire approach, and we have to be prepared to stand up for a society that benefits all, where the economy works for us. Every campaign is important. Every one of us is needed to work together to make the system change so it fits our needs instead of us having to fit into the system. Thanks to the organisers, we're committed as a union to this campaign. Best wishes and solidarity.
That's fantastic, Ian, and I think the Bakers and Workers Food and Allied Workers Union have been absolutely fantastic in the fight to try and retain jobs. And I think thank you for speaking today. Our next speaker is from the amazing strike at the Tate Gallery. It's a strike that's on its 41st day today. Over 313 redundancies right across the Tate Galleries. Cristina Petrella is the speaker, and she's the senior PCS union rep for Tate Enterprises, and she's just going to give a little flavour of what that strike's like and what it means and how it's possible to motivate and energise people to fight. So thank you very much for Cristina for coming tonight as part of our section of fighting to defend jobs.
Hi there. Yes, I'm Cristina, and I'm a PCS senior representative of Tate Commerce, the Tate bookshop. As you said, Tate retail workers have been on indefinite strike for over 1 month now. Today is the 41st day of strike. And we decided to strike to fight against Tate's decision to make 313 workers redundant in the midst of the pandemic, but also workers that are at large the lowest paid and the most precarious and most diverse section of Tate workforce. The same scenario, I need to be honest, is repeated across all cultural institutions, as all of them are preparing to make hundreds of staff redundant. But within this institution is again the working class and the lowest paid are going to pay the price of the crisis, like everywhere in the country. And we don't know how our fight is going to end, but definitely in the meantime, we have given some clear message, not only to our employer, but also to other workers in the culture sector and beyond. I think what we managed to do is we managed to control the narrative. It's important that for us, that whatever is happening, that we take control of the narrative, we don't leave it to the employer. And this is something that maybe every workplace facing job losses should do. We need to widen the terms of our fight. It cannot be a private business involving only employers and workers. And we managed to do that through raising awareness through social media, and through the union. We can control the narrative though only if we fight back, if we don't accept in silence what they're throwing at us. So fighting for our jobs, knowing that our fight will inspire other workers, because fighting and striking is still a worker option. And we don't need to go down in silence. And you don't need either to be a fighter, a warrior, an activist. You just need to feel the profound injustice at the current situation, and everybody can take place. Because the other thing is the decimation of job is completely preventable and political as well. We are not an unavoidable collateral damage of the pandemic. Political agenda are being pushed through during this time of crisis. And I also know that unionized worker can fight back and create a collective through the union. We can
go, Cristina.
Thanks. We can organize and create a stronger opposition in the current situation and in solidarity also across sector. We need to recognize that we are now at tipping point. If we leave it to the people now in charge, they will send us all back to the prehistory. The other thing that I want to add before finish, that we are now in talks and the negotiation with ACAS, and I can't say that much more about this at this point, but whatever happens, we can stop being militant and be partisan. In the past century, someone said that to really live means to be citizen and to take part. We need to bring our struggle outside, invite all fields in order to make together in solidarity everlasting changes. Thank you.
That's amazing, Cristina, and your strikes have been absolutely amazing and inspirational. And I think for people who are facing job cuts, that idea that you can stand up and fight is so well illustrated, as well as being some of the most artistic picket lines that I've seen for quite a long time. If people want to know how to make donations or to send messages of support or to take part in the Days of Action of Solidarity, then all the information is on the People Before Profit website, where you can, those resources will be there for you to access and download. Our final speaker in this section about fighting for jobs is Vicky Blake, who's been the president of the University and College Union. Amazing fights that have taken place in that union over a number of years, and it's with great pleasure that we have to invite her to speak on this section.
Thank you. Jobs are under threat throughout the entire UK economy, and the COVID-19 crisis has worsened inequalities, the effects of precarity and the gig economy, and it has rendered whole sectors precarious where previously workers might have considered themselves relatively secure. And this has been a shock. And we have to be there, right in there, bringing all workers together to resist the attacks on our livelihoods, on our health and on our lives. Because not one worker has done anything wrong. We need a meaningful strategy to save jobs and defend decent and safe working conditions. And Rishi Sunak's plan falls far short and it fails us all. Today, the Prime Minister announced another plan, this time one supposed to transform the training and skills system, but it is meaningless to speak of a lifetime skills guarantee when the government is doing so little to ensure there will be jobs in which to use those skills. UCU represents the post-16 education sector. So I understand how vital proper funding is for further education institutions, for adult and community education and prison education, as well as universities. And I understand that the plans announced today for further education also fall short. They fall short for staff working in the sector now, for people who urgently need support to study and jobs to use those skills in. In post-16 education, like so many sectors, workers are being bullied. Many colleges and universities are pitting job losses against health and safety. If you don't want to risk your life to work in an unsafe environment during the pandemic, you may be made to feel that you don't deserve your job. And without proper funding packages, redundancies are looming. The risk is being placed on the individual by management teams who don't have to sit in a room trying to teach in PPE or trying to wipe down tables in badly ventilated rooms in between classes. They are not the ones with unmanageable class sizes and workloads as their colleagues are laid off. So, faced with a government and employers who appear to see this pandemic as an opportunity to destroy workers' rights and to cut workforces, increasing all of our workloads and all of our risk, we must remember the strength and the power that we have as workers when we support each other to fight for every single job as if it was our own. Because there are alternatives to swinging cuts and to penury. This is a time for solidarity to go beyond words. We must build our unions, build our movement. And this is the fight of our lives, for our jobs and our conditions. And together we are stronger. So time to build our unions and solidarity. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks very much. And I think you're absolutely right. The idea that we decide which jobs come and go on the basis of whether we make profit means the Deloittes and the Serco and the Citels of this world, even when they're failing us so abjectly, continue, while universities and TATE and other people who are doing socially useful functions, you think they aren't going to survive. That's not the basis on which we should decide whether people work or not. And that sort of crisis has to go. The next section is about equality and unity. Equality and unity, I don't think we're on that section yet, but are we moving to the equality and unity? I thought we were on the section on safety next, where we're looking at oh no, sorry, apologies, I'm getting muddled up. The next section's about sort of an opposition to austerity, about there are choices about what we make, about the rich who are getting richer and richer whilst the poor are being expected to pay the price, and that there needs to be a movement that says, that turns that on its head, that say that we put people before profit. And I'm going to ask someone who won't need any introduction to any of you, no doubt, and that's Serwotka, who's the General Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Union, who's been absolutely fantastic at supporting and leading members in the fight against job losses, but also against privatisation and against all the other attempts to try and make workers pay for the crisis. So great pleasure in introducing Mark.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Karen. And can I say what a pleasure it is? It's a fantastic array of speakers tonight. And I want to just start by saying how proud I am that Cristina, somebody you just heard from, a fantastic union activist leading such a brilliant strike at the TATE. PCS is really proud of all our TATE strikers, and Cristina is doing a brilliant job. And, you know, my opening message and probably my closing message is that if everybody showed the tenacity and willing to fight as the TATE strikers had done, and we were able to spread that spirit across our movement, then we would have a very different society than we've got, and we would also have a much brighter future. So we're fully behind our members at the TATE, and I'm so proud of what we've heard tonight. I start from this position, really, that what this meeting is about and what our strategy is to get across to people that we live in a very unequal society. It was unequal before COVID. COVID has drawn out those inequalities, and the fight of our life needs to be mounted. Otherwise, post-COVID, we will go back to the very inequalities that we need to challenge. And I'll put it in this context. The furlough scheme was withdrawn days ago because we were told we can't afford it. In 2008, the government committed £500 billion to bail out the bank. That is 12 years ago. We're now told that the £60 billion that furlough was expected to cost is unaffordable. Contrast that with the fact that the 1,000 wealthiest people in Britain have a combined wealth of £743 billion. There is inequality written as starkly as you could wish to see it. Our job has to be to challenge that inequality for the future of the majority of people in Britain. It is no coincidence, therefore, that COVID has disproportionately affected the poorest, people from the Black community, people in our frontline public services. And we have a government that wants to exacerbate that and make it worse by forcing our communities to pay the price of what they have had to put in to fight the pandemic. That is what we cannot allow to stand. That means we must learn the lessons of a decade ago when our movement failed to unite and mount the battle against austerity that we needed to see. So what we need to come out of tonight is not just agree a program, an emergency program, but is to agree how we are going to get it. That means recognizing that politically at the moment, there is not enough opposition to the government in Parliament. We don't need timidity on the front benches. We need people fighting like lions in Parliament to articulate the very real agonies that our communities feel. Whether that is frontline workers dying because of a lack of PPE, whether it is our students told to go to university to keep the economy running and to get rents paid to the private sector who are now locked up like criminals, whether it is people on our appalling levels of benefits being told to go into job centres for interviews that are not mandatory, that are not required. We have to say no to this. We have to say no to the private sector exploiting this situation. So our members on strike in the TATE are on strike to defend jobs when the TATE as an institution has had £7 million bailout from the government, yet will not find the 700,000 it needs to defend every job. So these are inequalities that must be challenged. And yet what are we faced with? We're faced with potentially a pay freeze. We're faced with public sector workers being robbed of their legal rights over pensions. We're faced with millions of people facing unemployment. All of that will take a desperate situation and make it far worse, and we will live with the consequences for years to come. So my finishing message is simply this. The programme being launched tonight is a programme for equality, for fundamental change, for recognising those who've got the money should pay to put right the challenges that we all face.
1 minute.
That is a programme that we can all unite around, but it isn't going to happen by just having a programme. It will only happen by campaigning and fighting in communities, uniting students and pensioners and benefit claimants and public and private sector workers, climate change activists. It means uniting the 99% to challenge the riches of the 1%. And I think in closing, therefore, we need to see more TATE disputes. We need to see more joining up with the struggles. We need to see our unions uniting to fight for pay rises and for pensions justice. And the commitment on my union is we want to be part of that. No struggle is too small to take no notice of, and no struggle is too big for us to be frightened of. If we organise together, we can win a far better future. And if we don't, the consequences are going to be devastating.
That's brilliant, Mark. Brilliant, Mark. I'm going to very quickly move on to Belle Ribeiro-Addy, the MP for Streatham, who's got to go very quickly in tune to get to a vote. I'm going to call her in really quickly to talk about some of the equality issues.
Oh,
thank you, Belle.
Very much. Sorry, I'm standing in the corridor in Parliament. As we all know, during the pandemic, it was a bit of a refreshing change to see a different rhetoric on migrants, in that we had a situation where they were praised as key workers in the press instead of being demonised. But as soon as the government actually started to show that they were messing things up, it was business as usual. We saw the scapegoating of asylum seekers in the Channel Sea. And we all know that during that particular period of time, there are a disproportionate number of deaths in the BAME community due to COVID. Now we know that the coronavirus, for no genetic reason, disproportionately affects BAME people. And we know that coronavirus didn't create these inequalities. It was institutional racism that did that. And it's very, very important that we take a stand against this. We saw a situation where a lot of key workers from the BAME community were having to go into work because they had no recourse to public funds. Very difficult for them to take time off in those dangerous situations. So we need to support these workers and stand in solidarity with them. Now we know coming up, we have perhaps the worst economic recession that we've ever, since records began. And we know that during periods like that, there tends to be a situation where migrants are demonised and treated in a disgraceful manner. Now we need to... Hello?
You're still there, it's fine, we can hear you now.
Sorry. Now we need to make sure that we are taking a stand to support migrants in this country, understanding that, you know, immigration has always been synonymous with race, and that we have a terrible situation with a government that is looking to maintain its hostile environment, even though they know that they need workers to support our NHS. They're happy to maintain it. They're happy to continue deporting people in this very, very dangerous time. So I'm calling on all of you to stand in solidarity with migrants. Don't let the economic recession that's coming, a very, very difficult time, put us in a situation where we're allowing people to be scapegoating, because when they come for one of us, they come for all of us. Thank you very much.
That's amazing, Belle, and thank you very much for speaking while you're walking over to turn. You're about to go into a vote. So thank you very much for taking the time to come and do that. And you are absolutely right. The next section that we've got coming up is actually about safety. We're going to come back to the question of equality, but I think just on the question of equality, I think it's really important that as People Before Profit, when we launch the emergency programme, we absolutely say that we are not going to be sucked into any of the scapegoating that's taken place over any of the issues. You look at where they've tried to blame, as Belle said, black people for somehow having some genetic deficit, when what's clear is it's about the racism of the world that we live in that puts black people at the front line in order to catch it, whether that's working in buses, in the health service, in care homes, or being people who have disabilities often brought about by the stress associated with being sort of living in a world of racism. So we're going to move to our section on safety. We have a fantastic section in this. Our first speaker is Laura Verdasco, who's a Glasgow University student, who's going to come and talk to us about one of the other groups of workers who are being scapegoated at the moment, but how that fight for safety has been completely ignored in universities, and a completely predictable problem is now where we have lots and lots of people infected who shouldn't ever have been, in order for the universities to make profits. So I'm going to ask, with great pleasure, to ask Laura to speak to us. So thank you very much for coming.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me. My name is Laura Verdasco and I'm a University of Glasgow student. Now, I would like to take this moment to talk about the situation of students. As we all have seen, students are being increasingly blamed for the rising cases. Now, we've seen this and we want to say that's enough. We are facing the situation due to an incompetent government and universities. This was completely avoidable and in no case our fault. It was them who told students it was safe to come back, crammed everyone into student halls under the promise of blended learning, and all because profit once again comes before our safety and well-being. And yet we are the ones facing the consequences of hundreds of us are now stuck in student halls without even food provision being guaranteed. Now, given the situation, we demand immediate action. Firstly, testing, okay? We demand free testing for all students. Testing was one of the first recommendations of health organizations, and yet it is being consistently ignored by management who refuse to spend their millions on our welfare. Secondly, students who are in halls with positives must receive alternative accommodation if they're negative themselves. We cannot keep students in a flat of up to 12 people in this experiment to see if herd immunity works. This includes all of those who test negative being allowed to go back to the countries if they choose to do so, because students cannot live like this for those profiting of rent. This is taking such a huge toll on mental health and financial security. And this should really go without saying, but face-to-face teaching needs to stop. And while this has been attempted, we need more than this. Online education has to be accessible and people are getting left behind. We need those university millions going towards securing internet connection, computer provision, and lecturer interaction. This has not been guaranteed so far, and thus our education is lacking as a result. Now, this goes hand in hand with the need for lower student fees. The university cannot be seeking to profit of this situation, and our education quality has decreased, and so should the fees. And this must come with no staff redundancy, and we want to make this very clear because we want to put blame where blame is due, and ask the universities to not only stop this, but to increase the funds to staff. And this brings me to my last point very quickly. While students are getting blamed for this, we do not buy it. We need people to be held accountable for those responsible for this situation in the first place. We demand the risk assessment being made public, and those who decided it was right to come back facing consequences. And finally, I would just like to encourage everyone watching to take action. All my solidarity goes to all the students in halls facing this situation, and we're actually planning to have a student protest near Moreno in Glasgow for those who are attending there. We want to encourage everyone to attend. It is going to be held on Saturday at 12 midday. So that being said, thank you very much for having me, and I'll see you there.
That's brilliant. That's a great place to end with some action. And there's no doubt that sort of, you know, it was student militancy that stopped the student exams and the fiasco that we had there. And I'm sure it will be student militancy that stops both students and workers at universities paying the price for the lunacy of the way this government has acted in terms of bringing people back. So thank you very much, Laura. That was excellent. Our next speaker is Daniel Kebede. He's the Senior Vice President of the National Education Union. And the National Education Union have been absolutely fantastic at trying to ensure safety for schools, for school staff, for school children, and for school sort of people who in the community who bring people to and from school and the communities that they live in. So they've done a fantastic job, and I have great pleasure in inviting Daniel to come and speak to us now.
Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you very much for having this event and having me and the union represented here. First and foremost, I am a teacher. I teach in the northeast of England, and I have to be very honest, the situation is incredibly chaotic in schools in this area at the moment. We have rising virus rates in the northeast. It feels like COVID is completely out of control. The government measures are not working. They're incredibly complicated, the lockdown measures in the northeast at the minute. Boris Johnson doesn't even know what they are. And as a result, we do have a situation in schools where it is incredibly chaotic. Luckily, my own school hasn't had an outbreak yet, but plenty of those around me have done, unfortunately. And it didn't have to be this way. The government had 6 months or longer of lockdown to prepare a plan to get schools open in September, but keep them safe and keep our community safe, because you can't have safe schools without safe communities. You can't have safe communities without safe schools. But what he has done is left schools and their leaders completely unsupported on purpose, in my opinion. So they've got someone to blame when it all goes wrong. And unfortunately, it is all going wrong. We've had thousands of COVID incidents throughout the country. But we're very clear in our union. We wrote a plan in June to the government to say what was needed to get schools open safely and keep them open safely. And we need more than ever testing, high quality, fast testing in schools, without a doubt. My partner, she had to get a test today from County Durham. Her options were Newcastle, Middlesbrough or Carlisle. That is not acceptable. And this is why COVID is a class issue, because you need a car to get a test. You need internet access to get a test. And you need an employer who is not going to dock your wages to get a test and self-isolate. So thank you for all that you're doing. We also need to reduce social mixing in schools. Class sizes are too big. We are not allowed to mix with other households anymore in the northeast. However, 31 households mix in a northeast classroom on average every single day, and that is completely why we have got this great big outbreak. We need a plan B for blended learning. We need to have our children who live in poverty to have access to internet and laptops at home so they can access learning when we need to hit a plan B. And it just didn't have to be this way, and it is incredibly frustrating. I'm just going to finish now, and I just want to say two things. If you are in the union, become a rep in your school and organise a union group, because how well we defend our children, our colleagues and our communities depends on how well we are organised at school. And if you're not in the union, get active, Get active. I really like the idea of a day of action, and I'd love to see a day of action around education where the university colleges and the students there stand in solidarity with teachers in the schools, and we stand up and say no, because we are really in the fight for our lives. So thank you very much, Karen, and thank you very much, People Before Profit.
Apologies, didn't realise I wasn't muted, but thank you very much, Daniel. That was absolutely true, and you're absolutely right about having to get organised. One of the things that we're wanting to do after this national launch is to move to local launches so that we have local COVID committees. We know we can't have national demonstrations during sort of, you know, the level of pandemic that we have at the moment, but we do know that we can organise locally socially distanced protests that can have a massive impact with not necessarily the huge numbers that we might have outside of a pandemic. And it's crucial that we get those organised, and that they're not just organised sort of, you know, we can't do everything at a national level, but we can coordinate through the local groups. So we want you to find out where your local People Before Profit group is. Most of them will be having a launch meeting next week, and to join them to do that. But thank you very much, Daniel, absolutely right. And as I say, the NEU have been great in terms of fighting for safe workplaces in schools. Our next speaker is somebody who's been with us right from the very, very beginning, who, when we started People Before Profit and the Health Activists, we absolutely depended on. The national chair of the Hazards campaign, that fantastic campaign about health and safety that has never meant more to people than it has before, and about getting active and fighting for our rights. So I have a great warm welcome for Janet Newsham, who's done the Hazards campaign here in Manchester.
Thank you very much for that, really kind, those kind words, and thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. The Hazards campaign is absolutely pleased to be supporting this programme and the actions that you're taking. 2020 has been a devastating year for many workers and their families. Terrifying tentacles of COVID-19 have struck us in our homes, in our communities and in our workplaces. Thousands have died and many more left with chronic ill health and disabilities. Many workers have been unacceptably exposed to this fatal virus because the risks weren't controlled and PPE wasn't available in the quantities needed to the high enough precautionary levels specification. The impact of all our experiences this year will scar and will leave deep trauma amongst our family and friends. When the whole truth comes out, the hurt and harm deliberately caused to our loved ones in care homes will be unbearable, as will be the deaths and disabilities because of lack of health and safety management and safety enforcement. The Hazards campaign has been fighting hard on different fronts and continues to challenge the premature easing of lockdown, the mixed messaging coming from government, the lack of enforcement shown throughout this pandemic. We will strive for a zero COVID-19 policy and practice. We are continuing to challenge bad employers skating around the edges of health and safety scrutiny and putting workers' lives on the line. At the same time, we have been supporting reps and workers, putting pressure on their employers to ensure their health and safety. Our workplaces need to be COVID safe for a long time to come because of the high transmission rate and the failed privatised testing and tracking system. In the UK, we have a fragmentised system, with England content to keep high levels of transmission and other parts like Scotland aiming for zero COVID-19. It's been a system too obsessed with the opening up of the economy too early to put profits before people's lives. So it's worth reminding ourselves that health and safety law hasn't changed. Our employers have the same legal duty to ensure our mental and physical health and to carry out risk assessments which are suitable and sufficient. In every workplace, make sure that you've elected safety reps, because SRSC regs forces employers to consult with you on health and safety. Workers' health is public health and we need to ensure it. These are unprecedented times for many of us. There are also times when the best employers will support and encourage workers and the worst will exploit and dismiss workers. Trade union organised workplaces always were and always will be the only option, the only solution to protecting workers' health and safety at work. Solidarity greetings from Greater Manchester Hazards and the Hazards campaign. Thank you. You're on.
mute again. Sorry about that. I'm on mute again. Not doing well tonight. Thanks very much, Janet, for that. And our first days of action on the 9th and the 10th of October are going to be around safety, building safety, and for extending furlough and defending jobs. So hopefully people can use those days, whether it's locally in their workplaces or locally in their communities, to fight around that. So our next speaker is part of the next section that we've got about public ownership and ending outsourcing. And again, it's somebody who's been with us right from the very beginning, who has been incredibly good at solidarity with us as health workers, with school workers, with lots of people over the years. Jane Loftus, who's the Vice President of the Communications Workers Union, who have a massive fight on their hands as well over threats to theirs, and that sense of both the bosses and the government using this crisis to try and attack people for things that they've always wanted to do. So great pleasure in introducing Jane. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks everyone for watching and getting involved with the campaign. And I think it's a brilliant initiative because it pulls together everything that we need to be doing, not only for the short term, but for the long term in terms of society. COVID during lockdown, to me, exposed all the failings of capitalism and the free market. The idea is that it will provide for everything and we don't need to worry about it and we'll all have jobs, was completely exposed. What it did is bring the economy down to its barest minimal. And to me, that shows what an infrastructure is and what you do need in every country across the world. And that includes people that the CW represent, which is the postal workers, as well as the telecommunication workers who sometimes we forget. You know, Labour had a manifesto policy of free broadband for everyone, that we need to be connected in a modern day. And now we're in a situation where BT are issuing compulsory redundancies and the union is campaigning hard on them and fighting against them. And that is a business that is massively profitable. In terms of Royal Mail, ours has always been a bit of dispute. It's still a bit of dispute. We never believed we should have been privatised and we still campaign for public ownership. And to me, that is the same for other sections of the workforce in terms of utility, social care, health and well-being, transport, just to name but a few. If you are doing public services, you should be in public ownership. That doesn't mean to say you can't earn profits, but what it means to say is anything we do earn will be reinvested not only into the services, but into the employees. To me, the idea of cleaners being outsourced on the worst pay during this crisis, we should have been seeing an increase in workers' pay and cleaners' pay and more people employed. So just in terms of winding up, because obviously we've got quite a few speakers, I just want to say we need to unite all these struggles. We can change the course of what is going to happen. So we need to make sure our demands link up. We do want equality for all. We want decent workplaces. We want safe workplaces. Employers will exploit the situation. We can't afford to let them. Join the fight back. Get out there in your local communities, get out there in your workplaces, and let's stand side to side, show solidarity with each other and support each other, fighting for a better future. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, Jane. Our next speaker is another trade unionist that, again, I think most people will have heard of, Steve Hedley from the Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers Union. He's the Senior Assistant General Secretary, and he's also speaking on this section on public ownership of services and ending outsourcing. And certainly in the railways, that's something that I think we understand the impact of only too well. So thank you very much for agreeing to speak here today, Steve.
Well, thank you for having me. And first of all, I'd like to say that it seems that the left, so-called left Labour MPs have learned nothing. We've had the architect of the second referendum strategy now leading the party. And we've had another architect of it on here and another one blaming Brexit. It's no wonder the Labour parties are looking to the trade union to lead the struggle because they don't seem capable of leading anything. But having said that, we in the railways are in a very bad place. We have at the minute, we've got thousands of job cuts on the horizon, and that could turn into tens of thousands of job cuts. And that is because the government have funded the train operating companies, but have not funded TfL. And we're currently only funded up to the end of October, beginning of November on TfL. And that could mean thousands and thousands of job cuts if we don't do something about it. Meanwhile, billions of pounds of taxpayers' money are being shoveled into the pockets of private shareholders through the train operating companies. It'd be better, really, if they just give the money straight to the shareholders, because that's the kind of scandalous situation we're in. Workers are being laid off, and taxpayers' money's been handed to shareholders. Absolutely scandalous. Now, what do we do about it? Well, Boris has got a bill on the agenda, as you know, to try to limit again the effectiveness of unions taking strike action. In effect, they want us to break our own strike by running a minimum service. And that for me is one step too far. I mean, they've made it difficult for us to go on strike. Now they're trying to make us scab on our own strikes. And if workers can't struggle legally, they will find ways to struggle illegally. They'll break the law. And I think what we need with this people before profit is, if it's to be useful to the working class, we need to be setting up, in conjunction with other people, local committees, regional committees and national committees, to prepare to take unofficial industrial action. Because we'll have no lead from the TUC, we'll have no lead from a lot of other unions who don't believe in fighting, they believe in social partnership, wait for the next Labour government 10, 15 years down the road or whatever. So we'll have to have, and it's no good just exposing the TUC, we all know they're rubbish, but we have to present an alternative. So what working class militants now have to do is go out there, organise their workplaces, organise where they work, and get people ready to take unofficial industrial action. They fight the massive, it's not a recession that's coming our way, it's a depression that's coming our way. And what's for sure is working class people will never ever sit down and pay for this the way we did when the previous one came in, the austerity measures. So that's our task going forward, and we need to get organised right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is a very serious task that we have sort of in front of us, because if we don't do it, we know what happens. Already people are dying. People are dying around the world in their millions because of all the problems that we have. Our next speaker is about the climate change and about linking. They say they don't have enough money for climate change, but they have enough money to bail out businesses in their billions and billions of pounds at the moment, but they won't bail out workers. And we know if there aren't jobs for workers doing things that we don't need, there are lots of jobs that we need to do green investment, money that they said they couldn't afford. We should have those people working. And so I have great pleasure in inviting Suzanne Jeffery. She's the chair of the campaign against climate change, and something that we need yesterday, not even today.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks very much. And I would like to just start by saying that we had pleasure in discussing the People Before Profit emergency programme at our last trade union meeting of Campaign Against Climate Change, and fully endorsed the programme. So it's excellent to be here tonight at the launch. I just want to remind people that this time last year, pretty much in this week last year, there were literally millions of people around the globe on a global climate strike, led by young people, demanding the urgent action that we need to transition this society. And adults and trade unions stood and walked outside of workplaces to join those young people. And they were there because of the urgency of the situation. And the last year, whilst the COVID crisis has ravaged, hasn't undermined that urgency. Essentially, it has reinforced the urgency of the climate crisis with our climate fires, with our floods, with the horror of the melting ice of the Arctic and the Greenland ice sheets. And like the crisis of COVID, this is a crisis of inequality, of social and racial injustice and inequality. And those that have contributed least, those who don't have their hands on the lever of the fossil fuel economy, are the people that are suffering the greatest, with the least mitigation and the most unfairly. And that's the climate crisis that has carried on unabated whilst the COVID crisis has ravaged. They have the same roots. Both crises are rooted in a system which prioritizes profit over our ecosystems, our nature, our environment, and the health of people on this planet. And if they both have the same roots, then we cannot solve these crises by replicating and reproducing the system that is at the heart of these crises and has created these crises. We have to reject that system. And you know what? It is something that people don't want to return to. The business as usual of unsafe workplaces, the business as usual of an emissions-driven economy, the business as usual of a 0 hours, unregulated, long hours economy is not what people want to return to. Survey after survey tells us that. And that includes people who work in the industries at the heart of the fossil fuel economy. So we have to say this, and I think we have to say this absolutely at the heart of our programme. There should be nobody unemployed when we have a crisis of this nature. We have to demand that the money that is available, there is huge amounts of money available, 100 billion from Moonshot programme that Boris Johnson then denies that he ever spoke about. If there's 100 billion for that, there is 100 billion to put every worker who needs work into employment in a national climate service, in the jobs that can tackle our climate crisis and begin the transition to the kind of economy that we need, based on equality, based on tackling the twin crisis of COVID and our climate crisis. And that has to be a central demand that we raise up coming out today and as part of the emergency programme.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't think there's anybody that can disagree with that. It is a nonsense to have people unemployed doing nothing when there is so much essential work that needs to be done for the double crisis that is facing us, that they have insisted, that they've just ignored and been complacent about. So thank you very much, Suzanne. Our next section is moving on to welfare, and about a welfare system that provides real social security and dignity. And I have pleasure introducing Tanya Murat, who's from the Southwark Defend Council Housing, Up the Elephant campaign and Homes for All. So housing a key issue as people, income is dropped, as they're facing redundancy. That idea that you might also lose your home is an absolute disgrace. And so great pleasure in asking Tanya to speak.
Yeah, I want to start by saying that the housing crisis has always been a public health crisis. And that the twin crises of the economic crisis and the deadly pandemic have caused the massive insecurity that many people face in housing to get worse. And even those who are in secure housing, for example, the very small number of council tenants that are left, also face problems with their housing because of the sackings that have already come about because of the economic crisis and because of universal credit. So just to give you an idea of how universal credit has ravaged the council housing sector, 39% of tenants in my council area, Southwark, are now in rent arrears, and 64% of those rent arrears are due to universal credit, to the delays and the way that it operates. But in the private sector, 230,000 private renters in England are in rent arrears, and 1,700 are currently threatened with eviction, and that's rising every day. But that's in a period of time when up till the 20th of September, the eviction ban was still in place. So it's quite clear we need an emergency programme to save both lives and the livelihoods of working class people in this country. Part of that programme would be to stop and scrap universal credit, replace it with decent benefits and full housing benefit for those that need it, and also to reinstate the eviction ban. And it's quite clear that eviction resistance will become a massive thing on the agenda for many people. I just want to talk about empty homes as well. In terms of empty homes, Overcrowding is a huge issue in terms of public health, but there are plenty of homes that people could go to. There's 660,000 vacant homes at least in the country. So we're part of a campaign to hashtag requisition empty homes and hashtag fill empty council homes. Go on social media and see where our next action is going to be. The squatting movement has a extremely radical and honourable history. It forced Winston Churchill to introduce a law to make the requisitioning of empty homes much easier. Boris Johnson is a big fan of Winston Churchill. I believe we can make him do the same. Grab those empty homes, requisition them for council housing, and solve the housing crisis. That's the kind of emergency action we need.
Absolutely, Tanya, absolutely. And I think lots of the local sort of people before profit COVID action groups have been doing some of the work, picketing courts about evictions, trying to get the law changed. So excellent sort of, you know, if people can bring that back to the local launches and look at how we can engage and link, you know, all the things that we've talked about together. But housing is definitely one of the things that I think groups have often done stuff about already. Our next section is on equality, and it's absolutely clear that one of this government's strategies always is to try and divide and rule. They've been doing that for a long time with migrants, and we end up with the awful situation where there are people who are refused asylum seekers who end up with no recourse to public funds. And I think saying that they should give status to all those people is something that Belle talked about earlier, and is absolutely right. But we have also all the other people who are being scapegoated and are being blamed for this. And I think one of the groups that have often, that starting from sort of, you know, Blair right back to Blair, I think have blamed disabled people. I have absolute great pleasure in asking Paula Peters, who's from the National Steering Group for Disabled People Against Cuts and a leading force in that movement, who have been incredible in raising the rights of people with disabilities, to have rights, not charity, to have stand up for them and to begin to fight and to be seen as not people who are just victims, but who are people who have a right to both fight and to services. So thank you, Paula. Great of you to come along today. Really warm welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and solidarity from everyone at Disabled People Against Cuts. Obviously, we've been fighting now for 10 years against the coalition government and subsequent Tory governments on a brutal austerity agenda that has a dreadful impact on disabled people's lives, from the Independent Living Fund closure to the work capability assessment to PIP, to literally every cut, from access to work to funding withdrawn from deaf and disabled people's organisations. It's had horrendous impact. Now, DPAC were instrumental in bringing about the formal complaint of the UN Conventions of the Rights of People with Disabilities, and in 2016 the government were investigated under the convention, and obviously, as many of you know, were found guilty, the government, of grave and systemic human rights violations towards disabled people. With more evidence presented to the committee a year later, the cuts were ruled a human catastrophe on disabled people's lives. And it has to be said loud and clear here today that the running theme through the austerity agenda and the Coronavirus Act is eugenics. These policies that the government have in are designed to harm, they're designed to kill, they're designed to cause distress. That I need to make clear, and one death is one too many. We must never be silent on disabled people dying and the human rights violations that is happening right now. And with the Coronavirus Act that was really rushed through Parliament back in March, what we have seen with the coronavirus pandemic is 2/5 of the coronavirus deaths have been disabled people. And with the Coronavirus Act, we have seen with the Care Act, the government are giving the local authorities the way out with the Care Act appeasements, which basically means that they can cut disabled people's social care. Disabled people need social care and support during this pandemic, and that is one of the demands we've got. but also universal credit is going to have a dreadful impact going forwards. We've had 3.2 million new claims for universal credit since March, and with the furlough scheme due to end in October, that's going to have an impact. Join Scrap Universal Credit Alliance and set a local group up in your area. But tomorrow is the coronavirus review, and we need you to watch that debate in Parliament, but also sign the Inclusion London letter to write to your MP to tell them to scrap the easements and make sure disabled people get the support they're entitled to. So I say to you going forwards, we send solidarity to you. We work with a wide range of groups on the left. Join with us and let's build our movement, but also make sure that we all have the human rights we're entitled to, the support we're entitled to, and let's give this message to this government. While there is no justice for any disabled person, there is never going to be any peace for you. See you soon, and solidarity.
Absolutely, Paula, absolutely. The idea, and I read it in the Telegraph very early on in the pandemic, a journalist saying that because this virus killed people who were economically inactive, somehow that made it okay because it might be financially advantageous to the capitalist class. And I just think, I don't know how you ever thought it was okay to think that, let alone to put it in writing, but they did, and that illustrates the sort of people that we're having to fight, and precisely why we need to set up this movement that unites all that fight and refuses to allow any scapegoating. Our next speaker is Glen Shaw. He's a student from the student U-turn exams protests, and I think someone who had immense success a few months ago, coming to talk to us now about the fight for student rights. So very warm welcome, Glen.
Hi, so yeah, my name's Glen and I am a student activist, and I was one of the people who worked with Student U-turn and Solidarity with you all. So I've been an activist for just over a year, and I reported on and took part in many of the major movements of the past year or so, most notably Extinction Rebellion and more recently Black Lives Matter. These movements taught me a lot, and I use that knowledge to help me and my team at Student U-turn in telling the Tories that we mattered and we were going to fight for the children and young adults of this nation they just didn't seem to care about. After Results Day, we faced an algorithm that led to mass classism against public schooling, leading to thousands of lost uni places as thousands were downgraded, especially in the BAME community. When you take classism and add a system that puts BAME people in a lower class, you get institutional racism, plain and simple. Our protests were a huge success, leading to thousands of people across the country going to universities they deserve. And honestly, on the day of the U-turn, I came back from the Department of Education with my team, and we went home and sat on a Skype call and just sat there in just pure joy, and a few people did have a couple tears were had. It was an emotional day. The people were given a voice in the face of a government that didn't care. A government that was content with an algorithm that discriminated against those of a lower class, that in the middle of a pandemic saw an opportunity to keep themselves in power through the most underhand of tactics. But what did we do? We stood up, we screamed, bellowed, and fought our way to change. It was beautiful. Every movement has anger, and there is no generation as angry as Gen Z. Let me try and show you why. In the past 5 years, we have witnessed a Brexit vote that affected our future we couldn't vote in, 3 general elections, massive austerity measures that caused everyone in education to suffer, changes to the GCSE grades, and a global pandemic affecting our freshman year. And we haven't had our voices heard. The entire time I've been in education, all the problems have been for one reason. We don't have the funding. And now we're in a once in every 100 years level crisis. Many were surprised at how the education system struggled. But you know who wasn't? Gen Z. I have seen Tory after Tory claiming to be helping, but just plunging that system further and further down. Well, right now, we need a plan. We need someone to save our doctors, our nurses, our children. We need someone to be an adult and put aside their own interests so they can serve the people who elected them. But friends, there is hope now. I just turned 18. All those angry people who've been treated awfully by the Conservatives throughout the pandemic and over the past 8 years. You have thousands of young, angry people who have first-hand knowledge of how ill-suited this current government is. So please, every speaker here represents a different worthy cause that deserves change. So tell my generation, we will listen. We fought for Extinction Rebellion, for Black Lives Matter, and every time we were dismissed as wanting time off school. Well, here we are. And school's ended now, and I'm still here. So if you tell us, we will listen and we will fight. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Glenn. That's brilliant. And I do think that sometimes you feel like all this stuff's coming at you and there's nothing you can do and you can't win. And I think when we saw students, school students, standing up and fighting and turning over the government, it shows that all of us, if we stand up and fight, can. And I think we have to take inspiration from those young people. They led on climate change. They were the core of the Black Lives Matter movement. And they did that fantastic U-turn that shows that we can make this government sort of, you know, stop doing what they're doing, both in terms of COVID and in terms of jobs and in terms of safety and in terms of our future. So brilliant. Our next speaker is part of Stand Up to Racism, and I think racism is one of the very sharp tools that this government has used time and time again to try and divert people from the horrors that it engages in. And I think Stand Up to Racism have been key in trying to mobilise Black and white people together to unite, to fight, because it's not in any of our interests as working class people to have racism. It's how they get away with getting us to fight each other rather than fighting the system that creates the horrors for us. So Sabi Dalu, thank you very much for coming today, and I take the floor to you.
Thank you very much for having me here this evening. It's a privilege to address this very important meeting. It's no accident that the Black Lives Matter movement emerged during the COVID crisis. Both the coronavirus and its economic ramifications have impacted disproportionately on Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, leading to the biggest movement in US history, and obviously a massive international movement as well. In this country, 34% of deaths were BAME communities. And right now, over 30% of those in intensive care units are people of BAME backgrounds. In addition, BAME British communities were 40% less likely to be furloughed than their white counterparts. We demand a public inquiry, like the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, into the disproportionate impact on BAME communities of the coronavirus crisis. Sir Patrick Vallance and Professor Chris Whitty warned that cases could reach 50,000 a day by the middle of October. They also said that deaths could reach 200 a day by the middle of November. So let's say there were 200 deaths per day in the 3 months of winter. That's 18,250 deaths in addition to what we have already. And today there were over 7,000 cases and over 1 million deaths worldwide. And today there are 245 people on ventilators compared to only 88 2 weeks ago. So this is a very serious second wave that we are approaching. We cannot accept that those that become ill or that those that die are just collateral damage as the government prioritizes profit before people. We have to end this nonsense of living with the virus. The truth is, you cannot live with the virus and you cannot have an economic recovery whilst the virus is raging. We need to have a zero COVID strategy, a strategy to eliminate the virus, like countries New Zealand, China, Vietnam and others have implemented. That means we need proper lockdowns, proper test, track and isolate systems. And it also means that during that time, people have to be properly financially supported. We need to bring back this furlough scheme, not this wage subsidy scheme that Rishi Sunak announced last week. So I urge you to join Stand Up to Racism's online conference on Saturday the 17th and Sunday the 18th of October, where all of these issues and the disproportionate impact on BAME communities and the rise of racism and the Black Lives Matter movement will be discussed. So thank you for having me, and do join us on the 17th and 18th of October. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. And that Stand Up to Racism National Conference on the 17th of October looks absolutely fantastic and a must for everybody as part of the People Before Profit movement. So hopefully people can come along to that. Our next section is about fighting trade unions, because to be honest, Steve Hedley and a number of other people have said it, that we are strongest when we fight together. We're strongest in the workplace. We're strongest when we have that solidarity. And I think it's where we can sort of force the government back most easily if we use those forces. And currently we have a lot of trade union leaders, not the ones who are on the call tonight, but we have trade union leaders who are not prepared to mobilise. But fortunately, we have lots of people who are prepared to give examples to show that that's possible. So I have fantastic pleasure in introducing Consuelo Moreno. She's the cleaners rep for SOAS in Unison, speaking in a personal capacity after the fantastic victory that they've had at the university there, fighting against compulsory job losses. So Consuelo will be translated by her daughter Natalie, so she'll have slightly longer time in order to speak. So thank you very much for agreeing to come today, and it's great to hear you and hopefully be inspired again by the fight that you've had.
Thank you. Buenas noches, gracias a todos por invitarme a este evento. Soy limpiadora y representante sindical en la Universidad de SOAS.
She said, good night to all. Thank you for inviting me to assist to the event. I am a clean and union representative at the University of SOAS.
Durante esta pandemia hemos vivido y sufrido los devastadores recortes laborales, los trabajadores más vulnerables.
During this pandemic, we faced disaster and job cuts that most of them were suffered by the most vulnerable workers.
En SOAS vimos con tristeza marcharse a muchos de los trabajadores por la presión y la incertidumbre causada por toda esta crisis.
In SOAS, we saw with sadness many of our workers leave due to the pressure and uncertainty caused from this crisis.
Dejaron la institución después de muchos años de servicio y lanzándose a un futuro incierto y difícil por la poca oferta laboral que vivimos en este momento.
They left the institution after many years of service and launching into an uncertain and difficult future due to the reduced job offers that are present at this moment.
Perdimos el 40% de nuestro equipo de limpieza cuando nuestro trabajo esencial garantiza la seguridad de toda la comunidad en esta pandemia.
We lost 40% of the cleaning department when our essential job is to provide safety, health and safety throughout this pandemic.
Los que permanecimos nos organizamos y con una votación del 75% a favor de una huelga, logramos frenar los despidos obligatorios y conseguimos una gran victoria.
Those who continue, we united ourselves, and as an outcome of this unity, we had 75% result in favor of a strike to stop mandatory redundancies, and we were also successful.
Nuevamente, gracias a los miembros de Unison y a la campaña Justice for Workers.
Once again, thank you to our Unison members and our campaign Justice for Workers.
Es debido a esta victoria que apoyamos este programa para enfrentarnos a esta crisis.
Due to this is why we support also this program to face this crisis.
Evitar los despidos masivos y por sobre todo apoyar las huelgas, que son la mejor estrategia para conservar los puestos de trabajo.
To prevent any mass dismissal and above all to support the strikes, which are the best strategy to preserve our jobs.
Evitar los ataques a los salarios y a las condiciones y el derecho a trabajar en un lugar seguro.
Avoid attacks on any of our wages and maintain the right to work in a safe environment.
El éxito lo garantiza solo nuestra unión y nuestra organización.
Success is guaranteed only by a union and our organization.
Solidaridad para todos, la lucha continúa.
Solidarity for all, la lucha continúa.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That is incredible. And I think when you see workers organising, saying we are not putting up with job losses, balloting, they got a 75% yes vote on a 72% turnout, and the threat of that enough was to say we're backing down and we're not having those job losses. And I do think that illustrates that if you do put the full force of your union behind you, you can organise. And at a branch level, they did incredibly well. And I think they all deserve a round of applause. They're an inspiration to all of us. And sadly, their story should be front page of my union, Unison, their union, and all of our newspapers, so that people see it's possible to fight. And that's the role that sadly we've got to do in order to make that happen, to make people see that it's possible to win and fight. Our next speaker is our last speaker, which will be Amin Hadi. He's the branch secretary of Salford City Unison, and he's the Northwest Black Members secretary, speaking again in a personal capacity from Unison. And I have great pleasure in inviting Amin to talk in the fighting, building and fighting union section, and solidarity with every fight back. Thank you, Amin.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, no, I'm not branch secretary of Salford City Unison, but I'm definitely speaking as a member of Salford City Unison's officers group, and our branch are proud to be involved in People Before Profit initiative, and have been from the start. And you know, I think what the pandemic has exposed for working class people is that the system cares more about its profits than our people's lives, and it's demonstrated that over and over again in the decisions it's made. You know, you could go through them all. I mean, paying for cheap meals so that we all end up with COVID is probably the most bizarre measure ever taken by a government, but probably won't be the last, because they don't seem to care about the impact they have on our lives. And what's also clear to us is that the TUC and Keir Starmer are not going to be people that are going to lead the fight back against the rotten system that the Tories are trying to put on us. They don't seem to provide any opposition to that. In fact, unfortunately, they seem to be in undecent haste to get us back into our schools, not because they cared about our children's education, but because they were worried about the profits of their system and getting us all back to work. And that's what's motivated them all the way through this, not the safety of our people. And that's why the emergency programme is so important. And that's why we need to popularise what it stands for and make sure that we make those demands widely known and use it as an organising tool to be able to win grassroots members to fight back and resist and offer the solidarity that's already happening. Because I think that one of the positive things about the pandemic, if I can say this, is that the reaction it's inspired in ordinary working people to resist. It's typified most by the Black Lives Matter movement in America and how it's developed in this country and across the world. But it's also present in the struggles to stop people going back to school. It's been present in the disputes in Tower Hamlets, in local government and elsewhere. Massive votes for action, workers willing to challenge the system. We need to be able to organise those people on a base that shows the unity we need to fight for our qualities, that fight for the people that have been left behind, that are using food banks. We need to be able to organise at the grassroots level because they're the ones that can change society. It's the masses that make the difference in this world when they organise and resist. We are the ones that can really change this world for one that really genuinely puts people before profit. To do that, we need to build the struggles in the here and now, link up those fights, and make sure that the emergency programme is popular and the People for Profit group builds and becomes stronger as a pole of resistance for everyone that wants to see a fight back. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Amin. And Amin was our final speaker, and I want to thank all of you. We've had well over 600 people who've followed the meeting tonight, and I think that's an amazing start to the launch of this emergency programme. There has never been a greater need for us to do that. I think what the emergency programme does is it creates a set of different areas of our lives that are being attacked, but pulls them together and sees them as one fight in solidarity, linking together, so that when we provide that solidarity and we see see that it's the same capitalist system that has ignored climate change and done nothing about it, that has ignored the pandemic, that puts people before profit time and time again and expects us to pay the price. And it doesn't really matter whether that price is jobs for them. They don't care whether we have jobs or not. They only care whether they make money out of our jobs. They don't care whether they cut our wages and make it impossible for to live, and whether we end up homeless, whether we end up not being able to feed our children, whether we end up on the streets in the way that we see a growing level of homeless people and a growing level of asylum seekers and migrants who literally have no money whatsoever. And I think they don't care about any of that. They don't care about the people who've died during the pandemic, and they've left people. I work in the health service, and you see a set of staff who have watched what's happened over the last eight months. We've seen people work their socks off and watch people die, and that is a soul destroying process to go through when you know a large number of those deaths weren't necessary, but because of the way that this government has chosen to do it. We are exhausted, we are knackered, and we are also angry and frustrated because we know it could be different. We know it doesn't need to be like this. We know that that workers' rights are being completely ignored, Black people's rights, that the equality agendas that we have are just not being listened to. And this programme is an aim to put a list of what we want so that it's summed up for people in terms of a programme, but it's also a programme that's based on action. We are going to have days of action. I know it's difficult because we've got a pandemic, it's difficult because we've got lockdown, but we can't not act, because if we don't act, more people die. More people will end up, if we leave this in the hands of the Tory government, will end up dead, will end up disabled, will end up starving, and we cannot allow that to happen. And that's why we have to organise. So it is a plan for action, and there will be local groups to try and organise what we're doing locally, but there will also be national days of action. There's the next ones are on the 9th and the 10th of October, and that will be over jobs and safety at work. And the days of action after that will be at Halloween on the Friday and the Saturday to coincide with the end of furlough. And we will also attempt to create a solidarity network, because at the moment you don't know where to send the message of support to students, to SOAS, to the TATE workers. We're going to have a website that you can go on, People Before Profit, where you can find all the lists of who to send the messages of solidarity to, the donations, when their next days of action are, that you can join them. And we can all do our part in this, wherever we are, whether we're in work or out of work, we can all play our part in being part of one movement. That's what working class people do, where we're strong. And when we do that, we can beat them back, we can stop them. We want a world where people genuinely come before profit, and we won't get that unless we fight for it. And that's what we're here today to organise and create. So thank you to all the 600 people who've come. Please register your support for it by going on the website and signing up to the emergency programme. But please be part of your local groups and your trade unions and become an activist and be part of saying no to profit before people and to create a world for people before profit. Thanks again. It's before 9 o'clock. We've got 4 minutes to spare. So well done, everybody, and good night and thank you.